Hello, this is Brett Lonsdale and welcome to this webinar on SharePoint Online Permissions. First of all, I want to thank you all for attending so far and joining the webinar today. Hopefully it'll be very informative and you'll have quite a lot of content to go back to your own SharePoint Online environments and hopefully, if we can add a little bit of guidance to the permissions management for you, then we've done our job. So that's our aim for today. So first of all, I just want to introduce myself and my company to you. And once we've done that, we'll move swiftly on to learning a little bit about SharePoint Online Permissions best practices. So first of all, my name is Brett Lonsdale, and I've been in the SharePoint industry ever since around about 2003. Like most people in SharePoint, this is something that lands on your desk and you have to start working with it. So back then in 2003, I formed a training company over here in the UK where we offered SharePoint developer training and SharePoint administration training. That company still exists today, called Combined Knowledge, and they're partners with a company called MindSharp over in the US. And in 2007, I formed Lightning Tools, and ever since then, we've been creating products for Microsoft SharePoint, and of course now add-ins as well for SharePoint Online. So today's webinar is not a sales pitch, at least until the end it's not. So what we're going to be looking at is SharePoint permissions out of the box with SharePoint Online today, and on Thursday I'll be doing the same webinar but for SharePoint on premises in the SharePoint 2013. So if you do use SharePoint on premises, you might find that one useful. There are quite a few differences, but also there's quite a bit of content overlap as well. Some of the things are exactly the same. So as far as myself is concerned, like I say, I've been in the SharePoint industry now for about 13 years, or getting on for 13 years. Lightning Tools, we create products around lots of different areas in SharePoint, including permissions management, but content aggregation, data integration, and also social tools as well. So if you have a minute, be appreciative if you have a quick look on our site, see if there's any tools that take your fancy there. Also over here in the UK, the organizer or co-organizer of an event called the UK Community Day. So every couple of months we put a day together, attract some SharePoint MVPs and SharePoint or Microsoft instructors to come and present on either SharePoint development or SharePoint administration. And the next one is actually going to be on Office 365 users or power users. So if you are in the UK or fancy a trip to the UK, look out for that. That's going to be scheduled up on the ukcommunityday.com website for an event in May. Okay, so just so you know where I'm calling from, I am in this building that you can probably see on the slide. It's in the middle of a farm in West Haddon, which is in Northamptonshire in England. So if anybody is inquisitive as to whereabouts I'm calling from, I'm from that middle window on the top floor there. Okay, at that point we'll move on and start talking about permissions, and in particular the SharePoint permissions good practices. Now, one thing you'll note here, I'm using permissions good practices, not SharePoint permissions best practices, because some of these things will suit you as an organization, some of them won't, but this is based on, like I say, 13 years of experience of SharePoint, and permissions haven't changed all that much, although there were quite a few changes in 2013 that will be discussed today, which will affect you if you use SharePoint 2013 or Office 365, or even, I guess, SharePoint 2016 now. So that is things like the share functionality and the new edit permission level, which we'll be covering in quite a bit of depth. So first of all, a bit of a kind of brainstorm happened about, what do we care about? What should we care about when it comes down to SharePoint permissions, and what do we consider to be good practices? What do we want out from a good understanding of SharePoint permissions? One of the things right at the very top is fairly obvious, but either as tenant administrators or site collection administrators or even site owners, we need to have a good understanding of who can access our content. And by content, we mean the sites, the lists, the libraries, the folders, the documents, and so on. And some of these environments are very, very large, and we need to be able to fully understand who's got access to that content and ensure that people like Edward Snowden don't have access to it. So we need to know who can access it and sometimes who can't access it as well. So we need to have a good understanding of who can access the content. We need to know where permissions are inherited and where they're not inherited. A lot of the time those two things go hand in hand. We can inadvertently grant permissions to a user within a particular SharePoint team site, not knowing that a subsite that used to inherit permissions and now has unique permissions as a subsite shares some of the same groups. So simply by sharing permissions on a team site, we could be inadvertently adding that user to a group, which would affect subsites as well, even though those subsites could have broken permission inheritance. So that really needs a good understanding. We need to know, first of all, where permissions are inherited, where they're not, what groups are still inherited even though we've broken permission inheritance, and that will help us understand who can access our content. It's not just about seeing who's on that permissions page in SharePoint under site settings. We also need to have a good understanding of the share feature, and if you're new to Office 365 or new to SharePoint 2013, you may not have come across the new share feature yet. But this is basically a share button that you'll see in the top right hand corner of a team site. You'll also see it within lists and libraries at the top, and you'll also see it in the edit control block, the shortcut menu on each item and folder as well. So we need to understand what that share feature does, because that does have a bearing on the other 2 points, permission inheritance, and again, who can access our content. We could inadvertently be giving people much more permissions than we imagined we were, and we could also be breaking permission inheritance or granting direct permissions, all things that we don't particularly want to be doing. We'll actually start off with this point talking about decentralized permissions management. So if we look historically to sort of IT and IT tech support, a lot of permissions and security was always controlled around the IT department. So we'd have some form of IT administrator looking after our security and our permissions and controlling all of that stuff. Now, with the nature of SharePoint and the fact that users are creating their own team sites, they're creating in some senses their own site collections, and they're managers of those site collections. They are perhaps often the better people to understand who should have permissions to their content. So again, not all of the time, but in a lot of cases that will be useful. So we can have individuals from different departments managing permissions, and those people will also need to have a good understanding of what they're actually doing when it comes down to the permission inheritance, sharing content, and how to access these permission reports. The last 2 things are about being able to report more effectively, so using features like the check permissions control, or using third-party things, and that's where a demo will come in handy right at the very end, the last sort of 10 minutes of the webinar, and also managing permissions in bulk as well. So what happens if somebody leaves the organization, or what happens if we want to transfer permissions? We'll have a look at those right at the very end. So these are this is kind of the idea of the webinar, and what we'll cover each of these points so that we can more effectively manage permissions. So first of all, starting off with the very basics, what we've got is what is SharePoint Permissions. We'll just cover this very briefly, make sure everybody's on the right page. What you'll see set around a table here is lots of different types of people within inside an organization. We might have a mixture of managers, we might have warehouse staff, manufacturing, salespeople, all sorts of different people that could all be needing access to the same content, but their levels of permissions may be different depending on what their job responsibility is. So some people might just need to be some people might just need read permissions to some content, whereas other people need to manage it, the design of the sites, as well as obviously being able to manage lists and that sort of thing. So same group of people, but require different levels of access to the content, and there's lots of different ways in which we can facilitate that and give them different levels of permissions to that content. So in a nutshell, how the permissions work here in SharePoint, what we've got here in SharePoint Online specifically, we've got the tenant, if you like. So we obviously subscribe to an Office 365 SharePoint Online tenant, and it uses Azure AD, so we can, when we register users, SharePoint users, those users get registered, and those user accounts can be granted permissions to anything within inside our SharePoint environment. Okay, so we'll look at how they can be granted permissions in just a moment. But all we need to care about for now is we have a repository of users in Azure AD, and this is your user account that you would use to log in with. We also have groups. And there's two different types of groups. You'll see groups is repeated, once under tenant and once under site collection. So the tenant groups are things that are available at the Azure level. So if you were if you were creating an Office 365 group through Outlook or through OneNote or in all these different places where you can go through and create an Office group, or an Office 365 group, that is actually creating a group that you can use to assign permissions to. So they can be created at that level by users and managed by administrators, or we can also create them actually in Azure AD as well. And ideally they should reflect our departmental structure or team structure, so that we can go and grant permissions using these groups. Now you don't have to use them to grant permissions, but we'll talk about some pros and cons with using the Azure AD groups versus the SharePoint groups in a moment. The key thing to understand is that these Azure AD groups and these users aren't controlled by the site collection administrator. They are within inside the tenant. So the membership of those groups and registering of new user accounts and so on is done at the tenant level. Within the site collection, if you're a site collection administrator, then everything in this sort of shaded blue area becomes your responsibility. So we have SharePoint groups, first of all, and every single time you create a team site that has unique permissions, you'll have the ability to create some of these groups. And you'll notice that some are called owners, some are called members, some are called visitors, and so on. And you may also create your own custom groups in there as well, where you can assign permissions to those groups. We then have permission levels. So you'll come across permission levels such as full control, design, edit, contribute, etc. And those permission levels are basically containers for multiple permissions. So there's about 30 or 40 different permissions that are split into three categories. We have site permissions, we have list permissions, and we have personal permissions. There's just a few examples on the slide there of things like edit items, create subsites, manage lists, and though all of those permissions are organized into permission levels. And that's how we are granted permissions to individual sites, lists, libraries, folders, and documents, etc. So we can be assigned those permission levels in different ways. We can take an individual user. Let's start off there. We could take that user and put that user directly into a SharePoint group. So literally we just take, say, Bob, and we put Bob into the members group. And by putting Bob into the members group, members is mapped to the edit permission level. That might come as a surprise to some people that have come from a SharePoint 2010 background. So this new permission level of edit is now the default for the members group, whereas in 2010 it used to be the contribute permission level was the default permission level for the members group. So if we put Bob into the members group, he gets edit permissions, and that edit permission level basically contains all of the permissions, such as the ability to create content, delete items, so on and so forth. We could also skip that part. We could map a user directly to a permission level. So rather than putting him in a group, we could just simply assign Bob design permissions, let's say, to a particular site. So that's referred to as a direct permission, and really we want to try and avoid direct permissions as a good practice. The reason for it, we could have hundreds of sites, even in a small organization, we could have hundreds of sites, and that's going to effectively equal tens of thousands of documents and list items and so on. And if we've got lots of broken permission level inheritance and we've got lots of direct permissions, then it becomes a big pain in the neck to manage those users. What happens if Bob leaves the organization and there's thousands of places where he's been given direct permissions? We need to literally trawl through all of the different site permission pages and remove that user's permissions individually. Sure, we could simply disable his account in the tenant. That means he can't log on. Fantastic. But you're still going to see his name in every single permission report, and that's going to cause a big doubt in your organization when you keep seeing Bob popping up inside all these permission reports when he left the organization a couple of years ago. So we need to make sure that we clean up these users' permissions as well when they leave and so on. And direct permissions doesn't help us to do that because there's just too many places, too many access control lists where he could appear. If he's inside a group, we can simply remove him from those groups, and that makes it a lot more manageable. So we could give him direct permissions. We could also put Bob into a Azure AD group. So if he's in a group, let's say called sales at the Azure AD level, we could use that sales group, and we could either nest it inside a SharePoint group. So in other words, let's say we're creating a brand new SharePoint team site. We could take that sales Azure AD group and put it inside the members group. So that way we can very easily, like I say, remove Bob should he leave the organization. We take him out of the sales group, and that's going to remove his permissions from a lot of places inside SharePoint. We don't even have to trawl through too many SharePoint groups to remove him. We could also assign a permission level directly to an Azure AD group if we wanted to do that, and that's an alternative. So we'll talk a little bit about the differences between a SharePoint group and an Azure AD group as we go, and the advantages and disadvantages of each. Okay, I did forget to mention, if anybody's got any questions, that if you can write them down for now, and you'll be able to raise your hand at certain points where I break. There is an option to raise your hand in the GoToWebinar software, and I can then unmute you and you can ask your question. Okay. So tenant level, this is just kind of a couple of quick screenshots. So when you're in the Office 365 admin page or the admin dashboard, or admin center, whatever we want to call it, you'll notice on the left-hand side that under users, we have all the users that have been registered and granted a SharePoint Online subscription. And we've also got groups as well that are accessed from there. So we can actually go through and create groups inside the admin center, but users can also create these groups. I've got one in here, for example, called Pizza, that one of the users would have created through Outlook.com or something like that, and created the group there. So the idea being that users can create these groups for small ad hoc requirements where they need a group of people with a shared email address, a shared calendar, a shared OneDrive repository, and so on. And that group actually gets created and can be used to assign permissions to throughout SharePoint Online. So those groups do appear in here as well, but as a tenant admin, you can come into the admin center and manage that group. So within inside the site collection and within inside sites is where it becomes the responsibility of the site collection administrator. So under site settings, if we just simply, if we click onto the cog in the top right hand corner, used to be referred to as site actions, we can go to site actions, choose site settings, and there's a users and permissions category. And from there we can access all the people and groups and the site permissions and any access requests and things like that. So that's really the responsibility of the site collection administrator, is to take control of all of that, perhaps creating new groups, granting users permissions directly or putting them into some of these SharePoint groups, and basically knowing who's got permissions to the content. So who is a site collection administrator? Well, first of all, these people don't typically just do SharePoint. Obviously, an organization may hire a SharePoint admin or a whole bunch of SharePoint admins that have the responsibility every day of just managing SharePoint. The difference between site collection administrators and site owners is they've got another day job. they do something else. They may be salespeople, they may work in a warehouse, whatever, but they've been given this role of managing their site collection, and part of that becomes the responsibility of managing the permissions. So they will be granting permissions, they'll be managing the group membership, the access requests, and so on, and really that's the responsibility, and that's why they need a good understanding of how this security works here. So we're just going to go and have a quick look at all of that. We'll explore some users, permissions, and permission levels by creating a new team site. So I have an existing site here already, but just so that you can see everything's being sort of done out of the box, we're going to go through from site contents here on the cog icon in the top right corner. We're going to go through and create a brand new subsite. So currently this site collection only contains a single root site at the moment. So I'm just going to simply call this one subsite 1. Subsite 1 will be the URL as well, and I'm going to choose the team site template. And on this page here, we've got the option of using the same permissions as the parent site or using unique permissions. So I'm going to use unique permissions at this stage. So we'll tick that radio button and we'll go down to the bottom and hit create. So because I chose to have unique permissions, when it's creating this team site, it's going to prompt me to create some new groups, which we're going to do. Okay, so in here we've got the ability to create 3 new groups. Notice that is the default, so we're going to get a new visitors group, we're going to get a new members group, and we're going to get a new owners group. And from the members group, I'm going to simply remove myself. I'm already down as an owner, and what we'll do is we're going to add in another group called sales, and that group is an Azure AD group. So that's been resolved there, and that'll do. I'm just going to hit OK. Okay, so we have a brand new team site, and whoever's inside the Azure AD group now has permissions to it. So let's go and have a look at who's got permissions. So we'll click onto the site actions again in the top right hand corner, come down to site settings, and in the site settings, top left hand corner, we can go to either people and groups or site permissions. Let's go to people and groups first of all. This will show those 3 groups on the left hand side, so we can see the members, the owners, and the visitors. And notice under the members we have the sales group. If we go to the owners, then in there we can see Brett Lonsdale, myself. Okay, so obviously that's we've got a user account explicitly added to the owners group, and that's given him full control. And under members, we've got sales group. Now here's one difficulty. So remember, one of the best practices is to know exactly who's got permissions to your content. If we click onto the sales group, we don't get to see who is a member of it. That's one of the issues with using the Azure AD groups. So as a site collection administrator or as a site owner, we can't tell who is inside that group. We've got to trust the tenant admin to tell us who's inside that group, which is sometimes difficult. So that's one advantage of using a SharePoint group and putting users directly into a SharePoint group. So if we wanted to do that, we can just hit new, add users to this group, and in here we can go through and add a user. So I'll add a user called Andy. We'll drop him in here. Under show options, we can send him an email invitation. I won't do that. I'll just clear that and we'll hit share. Okay, so Andy has now become a member of my members group, and that's given him the edit permission level. Okay. Now what we're going to look at here is what can those users actually do? Well, if we click onto site permissions, and because I'm here in a subsite, I'm going to go to permission levels, and we'll be able to see the different permission levels. And that members group is mapped to this permission level, which is edit. And remember, that is the default for members. And this might be off-putting straight away. Anybody with edit permissions, which is a new permission level in 2013 onwards, can add, edit, and delete lists, as well as being able to view, add, update, and delete list items and documents. So that's a big concern. That's a huge step up from what we used to have in SharePoint 2010 as the default, which was the contribute level. So contributors can they can view, add, update, and delete list items and documents, but they can't actually create lists or edit those lists or delete those lists. So that's a very powerful level of permissions that is assigned by default to anybody with member level membership. Okay, so that's just one of the first things to address. So in a moment we'll have a look at another way where we can also assign those permissions as well. Just a quick note, really repeating myself a little bit here, but decentralizing permissions management, again, this is just listed as a good practice in some environments where you can identify power users, if you like, from a particular team of people or a department, and they will become the managers of the permissions. So that allows a user that's perhaps a lead of a team to effectively manage permissions without having to go through IT every time you want to grant permissions to a user or delete permissions from a user. It can be done centrally inside the site collection rather than going through to IT. So making sure the right people can access your content. So let's have a look at some of the reporting. So the people and groups view, one of the issues with that, it can be confusing. We're not enumerating the Azure AD groups, so we mentioned that that's an issue. So how can we check those permissions? Well, one of the things we can do by going back to site settings, under the people and groups, is click on to check permissions. So if we click on to check permissions, if we assume somebody's got permissions, we can actually go in and check what permission level they have been assigned. So in here, let's first of all enter Jared. So we'll enter Jared here. We'll hit check now, and what we can see is Jared has been given edit permissions, and that is through that subsite 1 members group. So I didn't put him in there explicitly. Remember, he's been given that level of permissions through the sales Azure AD group, which it's not telling me here. Okay, so if you had several Azure AD groups nested inside the members group, you also wouldn't be able to determine which group he's actually been added in to receive those permissions. So we really are trusting the tenant admin to make sure that the right people are in these groups here. Okay, now we can also list anybody with limited access. So quite often you'll see limited access, and that's something that's very much confused. So limited access doesn't really determine what level of permissions they have to the team site itself. It just basically means that a user has been granted permissions to either an item, a folder, or a list, or a library, or even a subsite that has unique permissions within your team site. So let's just say we've got a team site called sales. I create a document in the document library for that sales team site, just called document 1, and I break permission inheritance on document 1, and I give Judy edit permissions to that document, whereas any permissions weren't granted to Judy before on the team site, so she's been granted permissions to the document. In order to navigate to that document, she would need to have limited access to the team site. However, if she was granted permissions via an Azure AD group at the site level, it would still report Judy to have limited access to the site, and that's why it's misleading. So even if you see somebody as having limited access inside the site level permissions report, it's always worth using that check permissions control just to verify that they don't actually have more permissions than that. It may return that they have edit permissions or even full control when in fact the permission report is saying that they have limited access. So there's also confusion about how people got permissions sometimes. You might see people inside the groups and you didn't think that you'd added them to those groups. That can happen when permission inheritance has been broken, but groups are inherited, and we'll be covering that very, very shortly. So just some good practices at this stage. Use the check permissions to double check users' permissions and also to check limited access. Make sure you're collaborating with any tenant admins to understand who's a member of some of the Azure AD groups, and know the permission inheritance model. So we need to know what's inheriting, what used to inherit, what no longer inherits, and so on. And knowing what edit means as well. So this new permission level that does actually give the ability to delete lists and all of their content. And that is the default permission level for the members group. So the last thing we are going to look at there is the what happens when a user shares the content, and that's by using the share button. So there was this note by Microsoft. It's referring to 2016, but it's also relevant to 2013 and also Office 365. And that is that the share option allows end users to be less burdened with the details when they're assigning permissions. Basically, they can share something as you would do in maybe Facebook to grant permissions to somebody. Well, let's just have a quick look at that. If we go back to SharePoint, we've got this brand new team site that we created called Subsite 1. Okay, and what I'm going to do is use that new share button right up here in the top right hand corner. So if I click onto share, notice you've got the option when I'm sharing the site that I can make somebody the owner, or I can give them edit, or I can give them view permissions. Now, if I want them to be able to create documents or create list items, view isn't going to cut that. So the next step up is to give them edit. So if we choose edit, and let's add somebody in here. So we have user called Sarah, who happens to be my wife. So we'll put Sarah in there. Again, I'll just remove the send an email invitation and click share. Okay, so we get the notification in the top right hand corner that the site has been shared with Sarah. And let's navigate now to the site settings, and we'll go to people and groups. And you'll notice that Sarah has been made a member of Subsite 1 members group, which is fine if we're happy with the fact that Sarah can go through and delete entire document libraries and entire lists and so on. So rather than doing things that way, we might be more inclined to go and grant permissions via our own SharePoint groups. So what we could do here is click onto more on the left hand side there, and we can create our own new group called Subsite 1 Contributors. And we can describe the group, we can set the group owner. It's a good idea to have actually a group as the group owner, another group is the group owner, because if you can only have one entry in here, and if I put Brett Lonsdale and I leave the organization, then that means that nobody's the group owner. And if I say that only the group owner can edit the permissions of this group or the membership of this group, then we're stuck. That means that nobody can change the membership anymore. So typically we could maybe make that the top level site owners group or something to that effect as the group owner. Now here we can map this group to a permission level. So I'm going to map it to contribute rather than edit. So we'll click on to create for that. And now we've got our brand new group called Subsite 1 Contributors. So as a site owner or a site collection administrator, if I don't want to be giving this high level of permission of edit to all of my users, this is the way that I should grant permissions. So I can simply go through and add users to this group. So we could go through and add, say, Sarah to that one instead, and she can no longer delete entire lists or libraries. She can only work with the lists or the libraries that currently exist. Okay, so that's just quite a biggie actually, because the edit permissions, you could obviously do a lot of damage with that. So just be aware of it, and maybe work around it by not allowing people to click share and grant permissions that way. So we're going to dig in a little bit more with sharing permissions and also checking permissions. We'll come on to that in just a moment. What I want to cover first of all is just the permission inheritance model. Make sure that we've got a good understanding of that. So permission inheritance, we'll cover it at site level first. So we've got our top level site. Those in dark green have basically inherited permissions. So we've got the very top level site contains an access control list full of people that are assigned permissions, known as role assignments. Subsite 1 is inheriting permissions from the top level site. Subsite 2 is inheriting permissions from subsite 1. However, subsite 3 has unique permissions. It's a different color green. It's got another access control list, and subsite 4 is inheriting that access control list from subsite 3. Okay, so that's kind of the permission level. Now we can break that permission inheritance at any point. So if we wanted subsite 1 to have its own access control list, we could break the permission inheritance between it and the top level site. Subsite 2 would continue to inherit permissions from subsite 1. Within the site, the same thing applies to lists, libraries. So any list or a library would inherit from the site by default. Folders or root level documents or list items would inherit from the list or the library, and items within the folder, including subfolders, would inherit their permissions from the folder. So that's kind of the basics there. What happens when we break permissions? So we've got a team site here called sales site. It's got 3 groups in it, the default groups, the visitors, the members, and the owners. We then create a subsite, and the default is it inherits permissions. So the same people that are inside the visitors, members, and owners groups at the sales site level have the same level of permissions to the sales blog as the subsite. So we decide that we're going to break permission inheritance. So we break that permission inheritance and we go through and create 2 new groups, one called sales blog authors and one called sales blog approvers. The concerning part is the fact that unless we actually go through and remove sales visitors, sales members, and sales owners, the same people can still access the sales blog. So the same sales owners with full control are still receiving full control permissions to the sales blog, even though we've broken permission inheritance. Now, a question is, if we inadvertently go and add a new user at the sales site level, maybe we go and put somebody in the sales members at the sales site level, they do get the edit permissions at the sales site level, but they also get edit permissions at the sales blog subsite level as well. Even though we've got broken permission inheritance, the sales blog is still using the same group. It's not a copy of the group, it is the same group, the same members in it, even if we add new members at the parent level. So if we want to ensure that the sales blog is going to be isolated from the sales site, we need to first of all go through and remove the sales visitors, members, and owners groups from the sales blog site and continue with our new groups. So breaking permission inheritance is fairly straightforward. We can simply navigate to the permissions page of the site, of the item, or maybe a list or library, and just hit the button that you'll see on the ribbon under inheritance that says stop inheriting permissions. So we can click onto that. It will then have unique permissions. We can go through, delete any groups that we want to delete or any direct permissions, and we can start creating some new groups and putting our own users within inside those groups. However, we also have an issue with the share button and broken permission inheritance, which we're going to have a look at here. So we can click that share button at multiple levels. Let's just take a quick look at that. So here within inside our team site, we saw that we can click share in the top right hand corner of the site. Now when we did that, it didn't break the permission inheritance of the team site. So I granted Sarah permissions via that. I clicked onto share and I added a user in here. So again, we could add another user. Let's add Ara. So we'll click onto share. It's not broken permission inheritance on the subsite. In fact, the subsite already had unique permissions, but that's besides the point. If it was inheriting, it wouldn't have broken the permission inheritance. The subsite would have continued to inherit. Can the same be said with inside the lists of the libraries? Let's have a look. We've got a brand new document library here, and what I'm going to do is go through and create a new folder, of which we'll use an imaginary name called folder 1, and I'm also going to upload a document as well. So we'll just go and grab the first document that we come across. There we go. And so we now have a document called book 4. So folder 1, first of all, we've got several clicks here to go through. So we're going to click the tilde icon. We're going to click it again. We're going to go down to advanced, and then we're going to go down to shared with, and then we're going to go to advanced again in order to be able to see who has permissions to that particular folder. But what I care about really is this bit here, the yellow banner that says the folder inherits permissions from its parent. Okay, so let's just go back to that document library, and what we're going to do is click share on that folder, and we're going to share it with a user that currently doesn't have permissions to it. So that user would be Carl. So let's add Carl to this. We'll give him edit permissions, and I'll remove the invitation again and click share. So remember when we shared the site, it didn't break permission inheritance, but let's have a look at the folder. And you'll notice it now has unique permissions. So the permission inheritance has been broken for that folder in order to give Carl permissions. Now, also when we shared the site, it put Carl inside the members, it put the user inside the members group. It hasn't done that this time. Notice Carl has actually received a direct permission. He's got contribute directly. He doesn't even have edit, he has contribute. So it's a little bit misleading. If we click share at the site level, the end user gets edit permissions via the members group, and it doesn't break permission inheritance. But if we do it at folder level, permission inheritance is broken. The user gets contribute permissions, and it's a direct permission, not through a group. So that can be very confusing when you're clicking onto that share option. Now, one thing we certainly want to avoid is direct permissions. We mentioned the reason for that. If Carl was to leave the organization, we've got to now go and find all these folders that have their own access control list and remove Carl, and there's no bulk management here inside Office 365 that would allow us to do that. Now, the same thing would apply to an item as well. So if we click onto the share on the item, so that that item is currently inheriting permissions. If we shared that with Carl, even though it still says can edit, we'll click share. So it still says can edit, same as what it said at the site level and the folder level. But when we go to the advanced view, he can't edit, he can contribute. Okay, so it's the same wording that they've used for the site as well as the folders and the items, but it's actually a different permission level, and it's a direct permission. So again, something to be very wary of. So reporting and managing users in bulk. Basically, this is a requirement, but it's not something that SharePoint provides you with the ability of doing. So some of the restrictions that we have with reporting, you can't enumerate Active Directory groups, as we've seen. It's 4 or 5 clicks, as you just saw now, in order to be able to get to the actual permissions page. So if you are trying to remove Carl from several folders inside a library, we're talking about 5 or 6 clicks just to be able to get to that permissions page to be able to remove him. So we've got to do that across every single folder. We can't easily duplicate any permissions. We could use PowerShell in order to do that, but yeah, that's beyond the capabilities of the site collection administrator. And there's no way of filtering permission reports either. These permission reports can get very, very big. There is the check permissions option that we saw, but in order to use the check permissions, you can only put one person in there at a time. You're not going to want to do that for everybody inside your organization to be able to find out what permissions they really have to your team site. So that's where a third-party tool comes in handy. I just want to put in a caveat that DeliverPoint isn't the only third-party tool for permissions management. There are lots of them around, but yeah, a third-party tool really is a must-have in order to get some effective permission reporting. Management in bulk as well. So some of the issues here, let's just take Carl as an example, where he's been we've had a lot of permissions shared with Carl, and there's lots of broken permission inheritance across documents, across folders and sites and so on. What happens if Carl was to join a different team? Maybe he doesn't want to just leave the organization. He might join another team. We need to, again, go through all the different places where we suspect he might have permissions, remove him from those, and then go and grant him permissions to somewhere else. Likewise, if he was to leave the organization, we have to go and remove all of those permissions as well. So you can use PowerShell, again, to do this sort of thing. But other than that, they can't be managed in bulk using the UI. So some key points before we jump into DeliverPoint. Don't just accept the default groups. If you want to avoid the edit permission, consider creating your own SharePoint groups. So you can create your own SharePoint groups, assign them contribute permissions. You could even create your own custom permission level if you wanted to as well, and assign it that. So that way you can even have something that has a bit more than read permissions, but a little bit less than contribute. For example, you might want people to be able to create documents and edit documents, but not delete documents, as an example. So therefore you could create a custom permission level and assign that to a SharePoint group that you've created, assign the membership of it, and manage the permissions that way. When people do click share, anybody can click share, but it's not going to be an automatic share unless you have full control yourself. So what is going to happen if a non owner clicks share is it's basically going to put in an access request, and whoever is listed as the person that needs to accept those requests clicks approve, then there's not going to be any permission changes. But bear in mind that as that site collection administrator that's managing this, you could easily become inundated in access permission requests all the time from people that are wanting to gain permissions to some content, and you'll probably end up just accepting them and therefore granting edit permissions. So a more effective way of doing that is to discourage people using the share and manage permissions through your own SharePoint groups. If you are creating custom permission levels, don't edit the existing ones. So after what I've told you, it might be tempting to go into the edit permission level and remove the manage list permission. But doing that will just cause big confusions between site collections, because these are at site collection level. So it's much better to go through and copy something like the edit permission level, remove the manage lists, and therefore you've got your own custom permission level then at that choice. Okay, so at that point, I'll just run through a quick 5-10 minute demo of DeliverPoint, and then we'll open up for any questions that you might have at the end. So DeliverPoint is a tool that you can add to any SharePoint page. It's intended for site collection administrators. What it provides you with is the ability to run some better permission reports, but also manage permissions in bulk and so on as well. So what you'll see in here is all the sites as well as the lists and the libraries that belong to those sites, and also any subsites as well. So we can navigate this, see the lists and libraries, and manage permissions on all of these different things. The first thing to mention, if you just make a quick comparison between the test subsite 2 and the test subsite 1, you'll notice that the test subsite 1 has a full color icon, whereas the test subsite 2 has a dimmed icon. What that's basically telling me is that the test subsite 1 has unique permissions, test subsite 2 is inheriting its permissions, and you can't manage permissions at that level. So wherever they're dimmed, you can't manage permissions because they're inheriting. But if we wanted to manage that more effectively, then we can just simply select that, and we can break the permission inheritance just simply by clicking onto to break there, hitting break, and that will break the permission inheritance for test subsite 2, and now we can start managing permissions on it as well. If we want to produce a permission report, then basically we can go through and select one of these sites, and we can click onto Discover Permissions. Okay, so clicking onto Discover Permissions will show me exactly who's got permissions to that content, and you'll be able to see people that have permissions even if they're in an Azure AD group. So notice on the right here that we've got Judy. She's in the sales group that we know is the Azure AD group, and that sales group is nested into subsite 1 members. So that's how she's receiving the edit permissions that she's got here. Okay, we could also filter by permissions as well. So obviously we've only got a handful of users in this environment, but in a real world environment you're going to have potentially thousands of users with permissions. So what you can do is basically filter by permission level. If we just wanted to look at all the people with full control, or all of the people with read, or something like that, we can go through and filter this permission report so that we can more effectively see who's got the different levels of permissions to the particular team site. You can also export. So if we wanted to go through and sort a big mess out of permissions, and we can export this to CSV, so we can open it up in Excel, see exactly who's got permissions to what, and we can do some cleanup. You can also manage the permissions, so we can do a copy permissions, a grant permissions, transfer permissions, and delete permissions. Now how that will work is we can basically go through and select different sites in the tree view, and you could select hundreds of sites or the entire site collection if you wanted to. And let's say Carl was leaving the organization, but he was going to be replaced by somebody else. At that point we could just say simply transfer the permissions. So we can transfer the permissions from a particular user. So let's put in Sarah in there, transfer those permissions to Brett. And we can choose what we want to include. If we want to include subsites, lists, and items, and so on as well. And when we're happy, we just hit transfer, and it will take care of that for me across those 2 selected team sites, or the entire site collection if I'd have selected that. And you can show the details here, and it will tell you what permissions changed, if any. So you can see it removing some permissions from Sarah and adding them to Brett at that point. What we can also do is go through and look at an individual account. So so in here we've got some users. There's a subset of users that will be shown in the tree view, but if you wanted to go beyond that, you can also search the search for a user. So I can put in Brett and just simply do a search for that account. Okay, and if I expand that tree view, I'll see everything that Brett has access to, but what I'm going to do is just simply click Brett and say unique permissions, and this is for the entire site collection. It will tell me everything that Brett's got permissions to. So imagine that case with Carl, where we've got all the broken permission inheritance, all those direct permissions, where you have to do the 5 clicks for every single folder, every single document, every list or library. This basically does that in one go. So so we just select the name, hit unique permissions. I can see all of the groups that Brett's a member of. So these are SharePoint groups towards the bottom, and then we've got the Azure AD groups towards the top. And then I can see what sites he has permissions to and what permission level he's been assigned. And we can also see any list permissions, and it would tell me item permissions if there were broken permission inheritance, and direct permissions on the items as well. Okay, so we can see all of that. We can follow these links through to managing the permissions on those items. If I see something I don't like, I can simply go through and remove it, like the edit permissions in that particular case. So that's very useful. And again, we can also export that as well if we want to. And just one other thing that you might want to take a look at is being able to compare them. So if we do have maybe a couple of sites and we know the permissions are different between them, we can basically select those two sites, click Compare Permissions, and that will show me any differences between the two sites. So notice here, comparing the subsite 1 and subsite 2, I can see that Jared has edit permissions to subsite 1, but he only has read permissions to subsite 2, and so on. And this is great for troubleshooting. If you're trying to figure out why Jared can do something in one site but he can't do something in another, then we can run this comparison report and be able to tell the difference. So DeliverPoint, it runs as an add-in. It's something that you can add to any site where you want to manage permissions or manage the permissions for the entire site collection, and basically you access it in context with the content. So if I was inside a library of some sort, we can go through and do things like discover the permissions on that library whilst we're actually in the library itself, and produce a report on that library. So you're not having to go outside of the initial SharePoint Online environment. You can do all of this within it, which is useful. Okay, so that's just a quick tour of DeliverPoint without going into too much detail. There is actually a free version. It's not a trial, it's a free version of DeliverPoint that gives you the reporting only. So I encourage you to do that. It doesn't give you the bulk management, but it does give you the all of the reporting. So you can get that by going to lightningtools.com, clicking onto Office 365 add-ins, and on that drop down you'll see the free version of DeliverPoint, but we also have the pay for version as well, and that gives you the bulk management that you've seen today. So the ability to do things like copy, transfer, delete permissions, and grant permissions in bulk and things like that as well. Okay, so at that point, I'm going to pause and open up for any questions. So if you do have any questions, please raise your hand, and I'll unmute you. Or if you're shy, please feel free to email me or tweet me as well. So you could do that using my Twitter handle @BrettLonsdale, or the Lightning Tools Twitter handle as well. Or my email address is brett@lightningtools.com. So if you do want to ask a question here, just feel free to raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Otherwise, feel free to email in, and I'll be happy to do it from there as well. Okay, I don't think there's any questions so far. So what I'm going to do is just thank everybody for attending. The webinar has been recorded and it will be made available upon our site. So feel free to navigate there later on. If you go to lightningtools.com, click onto community and then webcasts, and you'll find the webcast is listed there, so you can watch it back at any point. Thank you very much everybody for attending. I hope you found it useful and there's something you can take away from the webinar.